Now, walking into the next election, there are murmurings that the ANC is cash-strapped. True or not, the ruling party now stands to gain a larger share of funding made available to political parties and independent candidates. This as it bulldozed the adoption of the Electoral Matters Amendment Bill. Lawson Naidoo from the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution joins us with more detail. Thank you so much for your time, Lawson. Now, just to actually start off with, is this from the pool of funds that is administered by the IEC?
Yes, it is. So in terms of the Political Party Funding Act, there are two separate pots of funding that are now available.
Yeah.
There's the funding that is administered by the Electoral Commission, which is public funding of political parties, represented political parties. Mm-hmm. And there's also something called the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, which is also administered by the Electoral Commission, but into which private donations are lodged. And the provision in the bill that has been changed now, or is in the process of being changed, was approved by the committee on Friday, still needs to go through the National Assembly. But it effectively means that the formula that is used to calculate the disbursement of those funds from those pots of money has changed. And it's a reversion to the formula that was in place up until the Party Funding Act was passed in 2018, which was the 90-10 split, where 90% of the funding is distributed on the basis of the proportional representation in the National Assembly and provincial legislatures, and 10% is shared equitably amongst all of those qualifying parties. It was changed in that act in 2018 to a 2/3, 1/3 split, which many felt was a much fairer distribution of those resources, because smaller parties and now independent candidates also require funding to be able to meaningfully participate in legislative processes. So this is a regressive step. It hands a lot more money to political parties, and we saw just in the budget a couple of weeks ago that the Minister of Finance has now added a further 200 million to the pot of money that will be going to political parties this year.
All right. So it is from the two pots, the multi-party democracy fund and also the other one for the parties that are represented in Parliament. All right.
Correct.
I'm wondering then what implications and dilemma this creates for smaller parties and independent candidates.
Well, unrepresented parties and independent candidates will not benefit from that until such time as they secure a seat in either the National Assembly or any of the provincial legislatures. So it'll only impact on them after the election. Okay. But what this means is that the bigger parties get a bigger slice of the cake, and the smaller parties, currently represented parties with 1, 2, or 3 seats, will find their share being reduced.
I mean, just obviously now, because it does involve also the pot, the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, where there's private funding in there as well. If a larger part of that goes to the ANC or to specific parties, does it not then discourage donors from, contributing to that pot?
Well, it may well have that impact. And in fact, the Electoral Commission, who administer the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, have had significant challenges in attracting funds into that pot of money. And I think now that the formula has been changed, or is in the process of being changed in this manner, it is likely that it will deter more people from participating in that multi-party fund, because the ANC is going to take the lion's share of that money.
Yeah. But now, does that mean that we could get more funding that is maybe channeled through direct donations?
Well, possibly. And, that brings into play the other issue around the thresholds for reporting of private donations to political parties. And we see that with the current threshold of 100,000 rands that has to be declared, there are lots of there's lots of funding that is not being disclosed to the Electoral Commission, assuming that the funding is either below 100,000 rands, or that parties are not fully disclosing the sources of their income. So there's one of the issues that needs to be addressed is the capacity and the resourcing of the party funding unit within the Electoral Commission to really administer this thing properly, to investigate whether parties are complying with the requirements of the Party Funding Act in terms of disclosing all donations that they need to.
Could this amendment maybe unfairly beef up the president's powers in the decision-making of political funding?
Well, that's one of the issues where, as civil society, we were successful in getting getting Parliament to backtrack on that, because the initial proposal was that the president could, merely after consulting Parliament, amend the thresholds and the ceiling for donations. As civil society, we rallied against that, and thankfully, the Portfolio Committee appears to have heard our voices and has reverted to the situation that the president can only do so on the adoption of a resolution to that effect by Parliament. So the fact that there's a parliamentary process that will determine these limits means that it will be much more open to public scrutiny, as well as to public participation in the determination of those thresholds and ceilings.
Just as we wrap up the conversation, Lawson, I understand that the bill does still need to be debated in the National Assembly. How long could this take for its completion, for it to be signed into law, considering also that elections are about 2 months away?
Yeah, so the bill was passed by the National Assembly Committee on Friday. It will now go to a plenary in the National Assembly for discussion and decision. If it is passed by the National Assembly, it will then be referred to the National Council of Provinces for their concurrence. But given the way that the ANC in particular has dealt with this bill, and the Minister of Home Affairs as well, it's likely that this bill will pass through the remaining steps within the national legislature within the next week or so.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and giving us insights on that, Lawson. That was Lawson Naidoo from the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution.